Welcome to Canada's podcast.
Hey everybody, I'm Phil Bliss, founder and CEO of Canada's podcast, coming to you today from Toronto. Today we're going to meet Sheena Yap Chan, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, keynote speaker, and executive strategy. Her globally recognized podcast, The Tao of Self-Confidence, has reached over 1.3 million downloads worldwide and is ranked as one of the top podcasts globally. She also has a Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Tao of Self-Confidence, and has delivered impactful keynotes for NASA, Live Nation, and UKG, where she's celebrated for her abilities to inspire change, foster engagement, and drive bottom-line results. So welcome to Canada's podcast, Sheena. I just in our pre-discussion, it's kind of interesting that you have such a big U.S. presence, but you're Canadian, so it's nice to get you into a Canadian kind of national podcast. But before we get too deep into a discussion and conversation, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, how you got to this point in your entrepreneurial journey, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. First off, Philip, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's really an honor to be a guest. And I think my journey really started with my upbringing, moving into Toronto from the Philippines when I was 7, and living in Toronto ever since. Back then there was nobody in the media that looked like me. So I always felt very small. I always felt like I wasn't good enough, or I always felt like I had to look a certain way to be successful or to feel beautiful. And so for me, representation was really important. I didn't know what that representation was going to look like, but I knew I wanted to do something where I can create better representation, especially for my own community, especially for Asian women, just because we've always been seen as quiet, submissive, and obedient. I wanted to dismantle the negative stereotype and have them be seen as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as successful females forging their own path. Because culturally, we've always been told to live a certain way, to act a certain way, to show up a certain way. So that's really how it started. It was really a need that I wanted. And I realized that need wasn't only for me, it was actually for a lot of people as well.
Yeah. But why go off on your own? Why build your own thing versus working within somebody else's company, somebody else's corporate framework?
I think for me, I just really wanted to create something for myself. I think part of it was like leaving a legacy was really important. I just didn't want to leave this planet or this earth regretting stuff, right? So for me, creating my own platform was something I wanted to do, even if I had no clue how I was going to do it. I've always wanted to help women, but I didn't know what that looked like. And that's when podcasting came in because I didn't know what it was. Like I was curious enough to figure it out. I just knew it was always on iTunes back in the day before Apple Podcasts came out. And I just love the concept of podcasting because people can just subscribe to your podcast. They can download the episodes and listen to it at any given moment. And so for me, I thought that this is it, right? And then back then, there wasn't even a lot of Asian people podcasting, especially about talking about the community. So I thought this is a really great opportunity to start, even if I was scared. I actually delayed it so many times because I was really scared. But I saw one Asian guy from California who was also podcasting. He was podcasting way before me, but I realized if he could do it, then I can go ahead and do it. And that's why for me, representation is important because if you see someone that looks like you, it just shows you what's possible for yourself. And so I kind of started with my podcast, didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. I just knew I wanted to have that platform. So building this podcast has been, well, you know what podcasting is like a labor of love, right? It's like your baby. It's a lot of work. And at the same time, it's really rewarding because you get to hear all these amazing stories. You get to connect with so many people. And at the same time, it takes you beyond podcasting, right? Like, having your own business, building a brand, building influence, creating worldwide influence as well, right? Being able to see that your podcast reaches in so many parts of the world and countries I've never even heard of. It's really amazing to see that.
So, yeah, let's talk a bit about that because, most people that we interview, are entrepreneurs. Their focus is Canada, and they never really move out of Canada. So, and you're Canadian. You live in Toronto, and yet you've built this reputation, certainly in the States, and increasingly globally. So, how did you get from Toronto? How did you get that reach, basically?
Yeah, I think for me, it was just being able to interview so many women. I mean, most of them are based in the US. So I think being able to share, their interviews to their audience kind of helped it out. And, when I was looking at the stats when they started the podcast, the US always had a bigger reach than Canada, which makes
Hmm.
sense because, I mean, the US does have 10 times more of the population than Canada, right? Like if you look at the state of California, is almost the same amount of
About
people
the
in
same size. It's about the same
Canada.
size population.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
about the same population. So,
yeah.
and I think that's why I was able to reach America a lot more, just because there's a wider audience, versus Canada, where our population is like a tenth of the US. And
Hmm.
then being able to interview other women from around the world, like the Philippines, in Europe, in Singapore. So being able to interview those women, it also reaches their audience in their respective countries, which kind of help just have that worldwide reach.
Join our thriving community of like-minded individuals who share a passion for success and innovation. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
And your focus is sort of what do you see as the future of entrepreneurship, especially for women in the next decade? There's been a lot going on in the last decade. I know that. What about the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, of course, entrepreneurship for women has been on the rise ever since the pandemic. There's been statistics where it just grew. But at the
Hmm.
same time, even though entrepreneurship for women has increased, the income versus men is still very low, right? And so for me, I would love to see women, making more income, making higher income, because there's been studies that, of course, when women make more money, it helps everybody, right? It helps the country's GDP, it helps create more jobs, it helps have more money for our countries. And so it's really important to do that. And now with AI, I think it's important for women to utilize AI in their businesses, right? I know sometimes as women, we tend to not trust it because we think it's going to take our jobs away. But I mean, if you learn to use AI for your business for good, like there's just so many possibilities out there because currently we're facing a gap now where there's a disparity of men versus women utilizing AI for their businesses. So for me, it's really important to empower women to utilize this new technology that we have because it's here to stay. It's going to keep evolving, right? And instead of fearing it, it's really important to just embrace it and use it to your advantage. I mean, I use AI in my own stuff, creating content, just even like utilizing ChatGPT as a sounding board, because it's just like really great for like mind dumping and brainstorming and things like that.
Yeah, I
And
loved
it's
it. I was on a session with my team, and there was like six of us, all in different locations, focusing on something and using kind of Chat GPT as a synthesizer, like throwing stuff in there and then coming out with something that's that's basically six brains finished result kind of thing.
yeah. So that's what I would love to see. That's where I'd love for women to just learn to utilize AI more and be able to trust it. I
Mhm.
mean, it is a great technology when used right, of course, right? I
Mhm.
mean, like I mentioned, it's evolving, it's here to stay. So instead of fearing it or avoiding it, it's important to embrace it, to use it, to learn more about it. And so even when I first started utilizing AI, like I didn't know what a prompt was. I just like dove in and figured it out as I go.
So let's move on to sort of some challenges. Um, you know, what's the greatest challenge you face in building your business to date?
The biggest challenge was myself. I mean, I doubted myself a lot. I went through major imposter syndrome, feeling like I wasn't good enough, feeling like I was a fraud. And I always, became my worst enemy instead of being my own best friend. So for me, it was important to tackle my own demons, right? Like in my first book, it's called The Tao of Self-Confidence, A Guide to Moving Beyond Trauma to Awaken the Leader Within. Like trauma is something that we don't talk about, but is really important because, when it comes to confidence, people constantly ask me, how do you build more confidence? How do you have more confidence? How do you boost your confidence? And it's like, I can share so many ways for you to build your confidence, but it's also important to figure out what is really stopping you from moving forward. Is there a time in your life that has stopped you from becoming the person that you be, right? Maybe you have this trauma in your childhood or later in your adult life, or sometimes we're even carrying not only our own traumas, but the traumas of our parents, our grandparents. So intergenerational trauma is really prevalent. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we don't work through that, we're constantly going to have this like feeling we're not good enough or feeling like we have this low self-confidence. So um, for me, that's really important to work through that. And it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, a leader. I mean, that is really important to work through it because if not, it's just going to be the same cycle over and over again. So people don't think this doesn't apply to business, but it does. Being an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur mindset is really huge, right? Because it's like 80% mindset and like 20% strategy. And if you don't have your mindset right, it's not going to be easy, or you're going to have a lot of uphill battles in your own entrepreneurial journey.
So you've overcome challenges on the way here. What do you see as the biggest challenge in your future as an entrepreneur?
I think sometimes success, right? Like, of course, we want to reach success, but sometimes when we reach success, it can get very scary, right? And so just leveling up, it can be really scary. It can be very uncomfortable, right? Because this is new territory. And sometimes, even myself, I still feel like maybe I'm not the person to be in this position, or maybe I'm not capable enough. And so I have to remind myself, like, if you were able to accomplish one thing, you can do it again. And growth is part of it, right? We're always going to keep growing. We're always going to go through these growing pains in our businesses. And I think that's something that's not talked about enough, but it really needs to be addressed
Mm-hmm.
because, especially on social media, like people see entrepreneurship as like just rainbows and butterflies, vacationing every single day. And that's not what really is like, right? Yes, you get to set your own schedules, but you could be working 24 hours in a day, right? Because you're your own boss. You're going to have to solve your own problems. I mean, there's no clocking in or clocking out. Like you can work all hours of the night. Like right now I'm talking to you in the Philippines. It's currently like 2 a.m. here. So, yes, being a digital nomad is great and you can work from anywhere in the world,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
time zones suck, right? Like time zones suck. And the older you get, like the harder it gets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, people don't talk about these things. Like you also have to learn to adjust to the environment that you're in. But I like it, because it helps me learn to pivot, it helps me learn to adapt to um new environments, and so it helps me a lot. But these are things that people don't talk about that is important to know that yeah, you can work from around the world, but you also have to be ready to work on different time zones, right? Especially if you're like if you want to live in Asia and you want to have clients in the US, then you have to adjust yourself to work to like US time zones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So you built something, and you've overcome some challenges on the way. Uh, how do you typically handle them? Have you developed a process so you hit something and step one, step two. What's that? What's your process?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was really the biggest lesson for me was learning learning to have a support system, having a sounding board, having friends in the industry that you're in because they understand the problems that you go through. And so you have someone to talk to about the problems that you go through that they can relate to and provide you solutions, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
when people are in business for themselves, it can get very, very lonely, right? Like very lonely. And so it's really important to have a support system. Like you don't always have to figure everything out yourself. You can have, an accountability partner, a networking group, a support group, where you can talk about what you're going through. And there could be, two or three people within your circle that can give you a different perspective. Especially when you're doing things on your own. We also have a lot of blind spots. So of course we can't see it because it's a blind spot. But you have support systems that can see that blind spot and be like, hey, actually, I noticed this, and maybe you haven't noticed this, but I do, and maybe we can figure out how we can solve this problem. So I also like reading books, listening to interviews of successful people because they're not overnight success. They've also been through a lot of challenges and roadblocks. And then just hearing what they did to overcome it kind of helps me have different ways of solving problems.
So you've been on your journey for some time. What advice would you give yourself now that you didn't have at the beginning?
I think the one piece of advice I would give myself is being okay to make mistakes and just show up as imperfect, right? I think as women, sometimes we want everything to be 100% perfect before we start something.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that delays our success because there's no such thing as perfection. And being 100% perfect is like an illusion. If we just went out there, made mistakes, correct them as we go along the way, like we can create more results. We can figure out the things that we want to figure out. We're able to solve problems because being an entrepreneur is about solving problems, and you can't solve a problem if you haven't gone through the problem yourself, right?
Right.
Sometimes we are in these situations because we might be that person to create the solution, whether it's learning to build confidence or becoming a better leader, becoming a better entrepreneur. Like we have to go through these parts that are not so pretty because
Mm-hmm.
that's what helps us build confidence, resilience, strength, and also solve problems for other people.
Yeah. So you talked about advice, but and mentorship. What's the best piece of advice that you've received? I mean, the kind of it's always there in the back of your mind, it's sort of one of those things that you pull out every so often, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, my old boss used to always tell me when one door closes, another one opens. I think sometimes we feel like when something ends, it's like the end. There's nothing else out there. And I have to keep reminding myself just because it ended doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It's just that one part ended and maybe that had to end because something better is coming along, right? And so that always helps me, especially when it comes to rejection, because being an entrepreneur, you go through a lot of rejection, right? You'll get way more no's than yes. And so that kind of helps me out too. It's just like, okay, that's a no. It's not a no forever.
Mm-hmm.
I can move on. I got a result. I can keep moving on. So just because that door's closed doesn't mean there's no opportunities out there. There's still so many other opportunities out there. It's just up to you if you want to keep going, right? Because it does take a lot of strength and resilience to keep moving forward, right? Being resilient is so important in this journey because we're going to have challenges, we're going to have roadblocks, we're going to have to go through so much rejection in this journey, but if you know where you're going, you're going to keep on going, right? And
Mm-hmm.
some of the most successful people are very successful because they were very resilient, right? People are always like, what's the secret to success? Like, in all honesty, you just got to be very resilient. Like, you have to learn to be resilient as ever because this isn't easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? And so I think that's a trait that every entrepreneur should have, because that really helps them keep moving forward regardless of any circumstances.
Okay, well, that's our 20 minutes of serious stuff. Let's get into some what I term rapid fire questions. A little lighter, still good learning stuff. If you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing instead?
I probably would still have a 9 to 5 job, I think, if I wasn't doing this. Just because, coming to Canada, that's what we were taught success was. Not that there's anything wrong with having a job, of course, if you love your job, like,
Right.
kudos to you. But not everybody loves their job, right? I think if anything, I'd probably have a 9 to 5 job, but I'd probably pick one that I would enjoy, right? Something that would like light me up, helps me wake up in the morning and be excited for it.
Stay ahead of the game with our expert tips and strategies that will help your business thrive in a digital era. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
What book are you currently reading, podcast listening to, or what would you recommend our audience take a read, take a listen kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I love listening to interviews. Like, so any interview-based podcast is really great, because for me, I love hearing other people's stories. It helps me see what they've been through. It helps me relate to them more. And so I just love anything that's like interview based. I don't have a specific one. I just kind of go on YouTube sometimes and just kind of check out what's there.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I would personally recommend my own books, because women's self-promotion is very important. And I want to empower women that it's okay to promote yourself. So, I have my book, The Tao of Self-Confidence, which is available now. You can get it at all Indigo stores. And I do have another book coming out this May called Bridging the Confidence Gap, How Empowered Women Change the World. So that's available for pre-order on Amazon and other major book retailers. So, so that's my shameless plug. And I want women to practice to promote themselves, because I think it's very important.
Okay. Are you a morning or a night person?
Morning.
Today you are, for sure.
Yes.
And if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would it be, and why would you choose that word?
Maybe quirky, because I can get I think I'm just sometimes like I'm in my own world. I just do things that make sense to me and doesn't make sense for other people. And so I've learned to embrace that, because that is what makes me different from everybody else. And I think we all have our little quirks here and there that we do that make sense for us. And
surely not. No, just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
That would be the word.
What's keeping you up at night?
I guess for me, it's really learning to see what's going on in the world, especially women. There's still so many things we go through as a woman in the year 2025, unfortunately. Like, you look at like Afghanistan, right? Like, they've been taken over by the Taliban, and women's basic rights have been taken away. What we see as a basic human right is actually, something that women are fighting for in Afghanistan right now, like not being able to speak up in public, not being able to show their faces in public, not even being able to go to school, right? Or now they're not even allowed to sing in their own homes or talk to each other. I mean, it's really unfortunate that this is still happening in the mid 2020s, right? Women's rights should have advanced a lot more. But I also know the pandemic, like the lockdown, kind of set us back a few steps. They're saying that gender parity is gonna, they said it was gonna be achieved at the earliest in the year 2154, but it's actually delayed now to 2158. And at the rate we're going, I feel like it's gonna take a little bit longer than the years that they mentioned.
Yeah, it's a little bit like climate change. It's the same kind of thing,
Yeah.
Talk a talk, but never make the date. That's that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think that's what keeps me up at night. It's like, how do we bridge the gap? How do we figure this out? How do we make that gender parity like even lower? Because that's like 5 generations it would take at least for us to achieve that. And how can we I guess, how do we help more women out there, right? Even though I don't live in Afghanistan, I mean, that's still a huge problem as a woman because if one country can do that, other countries can follow suit as well. It just takes one. So that's what keeps me up at night. And also being in the Philippines, like human trafficking is very, very prevalent here, right? Because poverty
Mhm.
is bad. And so it's really unfortunate that in Asian countries this still happens to today.
That's about it. I've kind of reached our time. It's been really interesting, and I've got to let you get back to sleep. So, but how can people get a hold of you online? What's the best approach? Because people listen to it and then they want to get hold of not of me, of you, kind of thing. So you know,
Yeah, for sure. So people can go to my website, sheenayapchan.com. There's a contact form there. I have a free quiz that people can take that can that can uncover their self-confidence personality. You can also order my books, The Tao of Self-Confidence, on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Indigo, or Bridging the Confidence Gap is available for pre-order on the same platforms. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. They can also check out my podcast, The Tao of Self-Confidence, on all major podcasting platforms. And if you forget anything that I mentioned, you can also Google my name, Sheena Yapchan, because I'm the only Sheena Yapchan on the internet.
that's great. Thank you for coming on. Been really interesting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.